Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Unfiltered Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Ruby. Okay, get prepared. This podcast episode is going to be a very heavy one, and it's also a topic that is really not taught. So that's why I wanted to focus on finances for this episode. I also do want to make a disclaimer in that I am in no way, shape, or form financially advising people how to manage their money. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not a licensed CPA. I wanted this to be a part one in this, what I'm going to call Money Talk series. I just need to break down the initial background I have with money and also my personal finances. So then I can segue really easily into the next part of the series, because for the next part of this series, I do want to deep dive into my financial success as a makeup artist. But I do think that sharing my background and overall financial history and how I view money really does tie into how I handled myself as a business owner. I definitely think that this episode will be helpful if you guys are, number one, in the same situation that I got myself into, number two, if you just want to build up a really solid savings account, and number three, we're all just curious as humans. Not many people are willing to go on the internet and share their financial history with a whole bunch of strangers. I'm definitely going to be revealing everything. Like, we're talking number figures, credit scores, savings accounts, everything. Like, I'm going in. Sorry about the very long-winded intro, but I think it's very important to just preface it with all of that and put a couple of disclaimers in there just so people won't get it twisted. But the very first thing that I wanted to talk about is my financial background and my viewpoints on finances. So starting off, I do want to say that I'm a millennial. With millennials and our generation, we were always taught to never talk about finances. The internet was not really a thing when I grew up. I mean, when I was in elementary school, the first prepaid phones were starting to come out, like as in you couldn't even get phones in color. So that's how far back we're talking. Like, we definitely went through a huge shift in the 90s into the early 2000s. So I think it's just very important to talk about generationally what our viewpoint was on this. We were never told to talk about money. It was a very taboo thing. We weren't even supposed to really talk about it with our parents, or at least my mom never talked about it. I grew up with a single parent, and she is also in a couple of generations higher than me. So she's a baby boomer. She is in her 70s right now. We are 42 years apart from each other because she adopted me when she was 42. So she grew up in the 60s and the 70s, pretty much. I was also an only child, so I did not have siblings to bounce ideas off of or talk to them about anything like this, and I was pretty much raised alone. I also want to say that I don't fault my mom for raising me this way. It was just a generational difference. Since we never talked about finances, I just kind of picked up the habits that she was doing throughout her life. My mom is always a person that has heavily prioritized trips and experiences and traveling more than she ever put emphasis on material objects, meaning that I didn't get the newest Xbox system. I didn't get even cable until I was in my senior year of high school. All the other kids in my grade had all these nice things. I went to a very, shall I say, not high society, but I want to say more upper class school system. There were a lot of people around me that had very luxurious, lavish cars, houses, lifestyles. A lot of people's parents that I went to school with were very high up in society. So they were CEOs, they were doctors, they were lawyers. And I was in the 10% that did not have a bunch of money. Now, I was not poor by any means. I don't consider myself being one of those, like, really poor to rich sort of stories. I mean, I was probably in like the lower middle class, I would say. My mom, even though she was a single parent, did very good for herself. She worked in life and health insurance her entire time. And then she also worked for Vera Bradley, which, if you guys are not from the Midwest area, you might not know what it is, but I think it has kind of traveled a little bit more East Coast and West Coast. Vera Bradley is a handbag company. So she worked there for probably about 10 years, I would say, but that was when I was in high school. But yeah, growing up though, she was in life and health insurance and did that as an agent. So yeah, she held down stable office jobs her whole entire life. So I saw her working her whole life. And I think that's why I also heavily love working. Like, I truly do love working. If I didn't work, I don't think I would honestly know what to do. Being a stay-at-home mom and being a stay-at-home wife to me sounds like the most awful thing personally in my whole entire life. I would be so bored. Like, I just truly love having that sense of accomplishment and physically earning my own money. And this is mainly due to seeing my mom put in all of this hard work and then in turn getting rewards by going on trips like cruises, and we went out of the country multiple different times. I've been lucky enough to fly on a plane more times than I've been alive in years. So I'm 31 currently, and I've probably been on a plane over 40 to 50 times by now. I can't really count, honestly. There were certain times where I would fly on a plane like up to 3 times every year. Because of the fact that my mom never spent money on material things. Like, we never had new cars. We never had the latest and greatest TV or whatever it was. She never even got furniture that often or decor for her house. Like, it was very minimal. And a bunch of people, I think, in my school thought that we had a bunch of money because everybody always just assumes that unless you're in the upper class and you have a bunch of money incoming, you can't go on these really lavish trips. But it also does depend on how much that you really prioritize different things. She prioritized trips and experiences, but we also were able to kind of skimp on the normal everyday household things that people would normally receive for birthday gifts or Christmas gifts. And instead of getting Christmas gifts sometimes, I got taken on a trip, and it kind of all ended up equaling out to each other. We might have had to not have the latest and greatest thing for a couple of years in order to afford the trips, but we still were able to afford them. So yeah, that was her whole entire mindset with that. And in turn, I've also adapted that mindset too. Growing up, I really do more so prioritize experiences. A lot of people in my life have owned a TV. But not many people can say that they've been to the Cayman Islands. Not many people can say they've been to Mexico. You know, it's like all about experiences to me, and I just want to experience different things in life. And if I have to withhold from material objects for a little bit, then I will do that. So that is exactly how my mom and I's mindset was and how she taught me. However, this is when the stipulation comes into play, because my mom, having a singular income and making a median salary, she wasn't making an insane amount of money, and she did not have a bunch of disposable income every single month. She was pretty much living paycheck by paycheck, I would say, maybe with like a little bit extra disposable income, but it wasn't much, guys. It wasn't much by any means. So in order to afford these trips, she put almost every single trip and every single expenditure on credit cards. Well, if you can tell, this taught me very bad financial habits in life, because I was like, okay, cool. If I can't afford it, this is free money that banks are giving you to spend just however you want to. And she would be one of those people that every single time she wanted something that was a physical object, maybe at a store like through Kohl's or JCPenney's when it was still around, she would take advantage of those 18 months interest-free cards. And that's how she would afford things. And that's not really quote unquote affording things when you can't actually pay it off in cash. So yeah, and I mean, 18 months is still a year and a half. And that is a very long time to have that expense. So I was mainly just taught to do that in my life. And you can tell how easily that I racked up credit card debt in my life because of this. With that being said, though, got my first credit card at 18, and my mom did definitely teach me that it's important to build a line of credit and have a good credit score. The whole saying of having bad credit is better than no credit is actually true. If you do not have a history of credit in your name, it's going to heavily weigh against you in life. You won't be able to get approved for very many things or a very high amount. After I turned 18, obviously I graduated from high school. And at the time when I was growing up, and this is so different than what it is now, so that's why I also like to preference that the times were different. We were always pushed in high school to go into college. No matter if you were undecided as a major, you would figure it out, and then that would be how you would be successful in life. through social media and through the last 10 years, it's very clear now that you do not need to have a college degree to be successful. In fact, the majority of people that are super successful, as in millionaires, do not have a college degree. It only, unfortunately, kind of gets a lot of people into debt. I mean, there's a statistic that's like over 50% of people that go into college don't actually utilize their degrees. I don't know if it's 50%. I don't know if it's that extreme, but there is quite a handful of people that get college degrees that don't actually utilize them after they graduate. And then they're stuck with thousands and thousands of dollars worth of debt that gets paid off eventually. But since the interest rates are so low on student loans the majority of the time, or at least they were, I don't know how they are now, but they were at the time, that people just extend them out for 20, 30, 40 years, and people are now still in their 50s paying off student loan debt. And it's crazy. Like, I still don't understand why we are pushed so hard as students to go into college when you're 18 years old. You have no idea what you want to do at that age. And I don't think that we should have pushed our kids at that point in time to go into college and make a decision on a major that we don't know anything about. Like, it should be an experimental phase. Like, you are just getting into your adulthood at that point in time and getting into your 20s. And it's an experimental time. It's a time where you need to try out different things. You need to go travel different places while you can and experience all of life before you end up picking a career that you may or may not enter into because you may hate halfway through your major like I did. So yes, I took the stereotypical route of getting pushed to go into college. I just thought that was what you did back then. You just graduated from high school, you went into college, you got your degree, you went into your field, and you were successful. I originally went into a 2-year college. It was a community college, Ivy Tech, and I did actually get a full ride scholarship to get my associate's degree. I did actually an accelerated program, so I completed my 2-year college degree in a year. It was like a special scholarship program with a whole bunch of us. I think there was like 15 students, if I'm not mistaken, between like 15 and 20. Some of the students stopped at their associate's degree, which, to be completely honest, I probably should have done. But I was like, nope, I got to go on to my 4-year degree. So I got that degree, obviously debt free, because I didn't have to pay for anything. I didn't even have to pay for my books or anything. The scholarship program completely paid for it, which I was so fortunate for, because otherwise I would have been in a lot more debt than I am right now. So I went on to the 4-year college degree, had to pay for everything. I didn't have a scholarship or any money going towards that at all. My college was only maybe 20 minutes away from my actual house, my mom's house that I lived in, but I wanted the full college experience. And so I decided to make the investment and live on student housing. Student housing, to be fair, is probably one of the best experiences, but also the worst financial decision that you could probably make as a college student. You're already in debt anyways, but you don't know it because you're not physically seeing that payment or that loan being taken out or anything until you graduate. So at that point in time, it's kind of like invisible money. So I paid for 2 years being on campus. And I gotta say that the amount of money that I spent was ridiculous, because student housing is kind of interesting. I don't know if it still works the same way. Normally, if you go into an apartment, you are splitting the cost of everything 50-50. Say hypothetically, you were paying $1,200 per month altogether for your apartment. That would mean that $600 would be paid by you and then $600 would be paid by your roommate. However, with student housing, you would each be paying that $1,200. There is no split between that amount. Like, you're each paying that amount. And I think that you can either pay it per month or you can wrap it into your student loans. And I think that's how that worked. So because my mom did not have the extra finances to do that for me during college, because I was fully supported by her at the time, I worked a minimum wage job, and minimum wage in the state where I live in, which is Indiana, is $7.50 an hour, I believe. We don't make that now, I want to preface. I want to say right now is that most everybody around here now is making between like a minimum of like $12 to $14 an hour because of how high inflation has gotten and how high living costs have gotten. But at the time, $7.50, $8 an hour was a completely normal wage to live off of, which is kind of crazy to say. It was definitely the lower end of the spectrum, but you could make rent payments with that. And rent by no means was like in the thousands of dollars at the time. I mean, I then was able to get apartments after I lived in student housing and probably paid $700 for a 1,200 square foot townhouse. That's pretty much my living situation that I had at the time. I was definitely still making like between $8 to $9 an hour. I was working a couple of different jobs at the time simultaneously while I was taking the college classes. I eventually did actually graduate. I do have a bachelor's in public policy with a major in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. Okay, so this is where the heaviness really comes into play, and I'm going to really try not to get emotional with this. I had a pretty religious mom. She raised me as a pretty devout Christian. We were non-denominational, so it wasn't like we were Roman Catholic or anything like very strict. But I was definitely raised Christian. We were in church every single Sunday. We prayed before dinner, like that sort of thing. And I think that there was just a lot of questions that I had as far as religion goes. So I kind of slowly drifted away from my religious background when I went off into college. And that was pretty much my first time, along with everybody else, when I was able to get out of my house, out of my parents' supervision, and really was able to kind of let loose a little bit and experiment. I understand that this is a time to experiment, but like most every other college student, I went a little bit crazy with it. I'll just kind of briefly go over the things that I kind of got myself into. So got myself into way too many like party-like atmospheres. I've got myself into alcohol and drugs and pretty hardcore ones of that. And then I also did smoke cigarettes at one point in time because I thought I was cool. I did not have a nicotine addiction though. Luckily, I was able to stop like pretty cold turkey. And then also I was definitely kind of hoeing it a little bit at that point in time. Like there was definitely multiple different partners that was happening. And not in committed relationships. I mean, we're talking like one night stands sometimes. I hate to admit this to everybody else, but like, I think that people genuinely need to hear it. Like if you think you are in a bad situation right now and you're looking at me like, wow, this girl really, really has her shit together. There was a time where I really did not have my shit together. And that's why I think it's important to talk about how your life can completely flip 360 completely if you just commit to making it better. And that's all it takes. Like that's all it takes is the mental and physical energy to propel yourself in a different direction, and your life can be completely different. So yes, I was going through all that at the time. I also at 18 years old got engaged to somebody else that I am not married to right now. This is a completely different partner. We were engaged for about a year, and I ended up breaking up the engagement. He accused me of cheating on him, which I did not cheat on him, but he thought I did. He blasted me on Facebook, called me a whore, and all sorts of other names, and told everybody on Facebook that I was a cheater and that I slept with somebody else and everything. And it was a horrible situation, probably between age, I want to say 20 to 22 was probably the worst time in my life. It was when I essentially hit rock bottom. I think we all come to that point in life. But yeah, that was definitely mine. I got myself into a lot of different things that I can't believe I dug myself out of. Like I was so depressed at the time. I had a lot of anxiety. It kind of made me more of an introvert because I was just embarrassed to be out in public with people anymore. That was basically what I was doing to myself at the time. And I also, on top of that, racked up a ton of debt. And this was specifically with credit cards. I would try to numb my pain with buying things for myself, getting that ultimate serotonin high. But then, of course, that did not last. It was very temporary. And once I got the thing that I wanted, I was over it and had to get something else to get that high again, essentially. Well, this made me rack up probably about, I know it was definitely over $5,000 in credit card debt. And while you guys might not think that is a insane amount of debt, like a bunch of people now would be able to get themselves out of it really easily. But think about it. I was making $8 an hour at my jobs. I was already taking out student loan debts, and the student loan debts were probably around like $40,000, I would say. I think that's what they ended up equaling to, between my mom's student loan that she took out. She took out like a Parent Plus loan, and then I took out my student loan too. I think between the two of us, it was between like $40,000 to $50,000, I would say. $5,000 is a lot for somebody that's in that situation. And I was living paycheck by paycheck. I did not have a savings account. I probably kept probably like $50 to $100 in my checking account at one point in time. And that is all the money that I had to my name, guys. I didn't have any extra disposable income to pay toward that credit card. But at the time, I was like, hey, that's extra $5,000 that the bank's giving me. And I was also in the same situation too as most people, where if they're in a huge financial crisis, they can only afford to pay the minimum payment on your statement every single month. And that sometimes doesn't even offset the interest that's being accumulated each month. For instance, I was paying that minimum of like $25 every single month, and my interest was like $30. So in a nutshell, if you think about it, I would never be able to pay off the balance. I didn't see it that way. I was like, oh, as long as I'm making payments every single month on this credit card, it's getting paid down. But that's not how that works. So if you guys are in the same situation as me and making your minimum monthly payments on credit cards, please at least pay over the minimum balance. Otherwise, you are never going to pay off that credit card. And this is specifically only with credit cards. At least with loans, you have actual significant monthly payments that you have to pay every single month. But with credit cards, they have that nice minimum monthly payment. Why would I pay $300 when I could only pay $25 every single month, you know? Yeah, don't do it. Don't be dumb like I was. It's going to get you into a lot more financial trouble than you want it to be. And then everything's just going to kind of stockpile on top of each other. And then I also had a car payment at the time too, because your girl got herself into a couple of different car accidents at the time, which were definitely my fault. And I didn't have really nice cars by any means. Like, they were decent. I had a couple of different Impalas. I had a Honda Accord at one point in time. They weren't anything like really fancy by any means because I couldn't afford it. I always had to have a cosigner on a car. And I think my credit score at the time was like 630. Keep in mind that like 650 is really the credit score that you have to get anybody to actually take you somewhat seriously and to get approved for basic loans. So 630 was 20 points underneath what I needed to have as a normal person, whereas anything over 700 is considered a good credit score. So really, like, you should be over like 700 to 750, I would say, is like what you want to achieve or strive towards. I couldn't even afford to consolidate any of my loans because I had racked up such a large amount of debt, and having a 630 credit score, no bank or credit union would even consolidate my loans because they didn't trust me enough. Okay, so if you didn't think that was bad, second worst financial situation that I ever got myself into was doing a elective cosmetic surgery. And this was pretty invasive. I don't know why I thought this was a good thing, but I also did this like right after I totaled out one of my cars. So I was already paying for a new car and a new car loan. I definitely then paid $6,000 for this cosmetic surgery on top of everything else. Of course, I couldn't afford it, so I took out another credit card that was 18 months interest free. So now we're talking upwards of that, $60,000 worth of debt. So that is pretty much the financial situation that I was in at the time. And this was not even a decade ago, guys. Like, it was probably around 2016, 17 when I got myself into this situation. Then at the time, got together with my husband, or now husband. So he was a godsend. If you find a person that accepts you for the way that you are and is genuinely trying to help you in life, they are a good person. Like, you want them in your life. And that is what I found in my now husband. We have actually been friends since 7th grade. But he obviously did not know how bad I was struggling. He was friends with me still through my college days and everything, but I didn't really talk to him about my finances or anything because I was always taught never to talk about finances. We ended up getting in a relationship when I was still in this situation, by the way. Like, I was still spending frivolous money and putting it on credit cards because I couldn't afford it. I was still in a job that maybe paid a little bit more, but I was probably around like the $9 to $10 mark. So yes, your income and what you make definitely has a lot to do with it. However, I was also not allocating money and putting it aside to pay off anything. So when I met my husband, he had a completely different money mindset than I did. In his family, he was always raised to be a saver. He was raised to be the person that if it wasn't a necessary expense, you didn't have to spend the money. There's a huge difference between wants and needs and your essentials in life. And he ultimately was almost kind of the other extreme end of it, where he was an extreme saver, almost like on those extreme cheapskates shows that used to be on TLC. Like, he was a huge penny pincher. He did not spend beyond his means. In fact, he would like rarely go out with people because he would hate spending money on himself. But also he built up a pretty good savings account for himself, and he also worked really hard. He was also living at home at the time. So when we got together, he and I obviously had to be very forthcoming about our financial situations, both of them. And I kind of taught him that you can let loose a little bit with spending money, but then really the whole entire life lesson that I got taught was that you cannot spend all the money that you're making. And he just really shifted my perspective about this. Like, I don't know what I would have done without him. Like, I don't think I ever would have turned my life around if somebody like him did not sit with me one day and is like, listen, you're going in an extremely wrong direction. You need to get your shit together and figure this out really freaking quick. Otherwise, you're going to be literally bankrupt. And I mean, there was a situation at a point in time where I was heavily considering bankruptcy just so I could wipe my slate clean and start over again, because I did not know what to do with myself. Like, I was screaming help from the top of my lungs, and nobody, I felt like, could hear me, and I was just internalizing everything. Well, after we sat down, he actually agreed to help me pay off my credit card debt. He was paying for my credit cards, and then instead of me paying interest on that credit card, I would just pay him back every single month, so I wasn't accumulating interest. Eventually, I was able to, with his help, pay off the $5,000 worth of credit card debt. It was not easy. The $5,000, by the way, was only on my actual Wells Fargo credit card that I had at the time. It wasn't including my surgery or anything. That $6,000 was definitely still a thing, but because I had 18 months interest free, I wasn't completely worried about that one. So I tackled the one that was collecting interest first and then going on to the other ones. Overall, I am extremely grateful for my husband. I can't believe he helped me with that. Like, he is such a nice and just a really generous person. He's honestly said to me now that if I had continued on that same path, we probably would not have been together, and he probably would have had to break up eventually, because if I didn't want to change, then it wouldn't have worked out, which I completely agree. I want to say that I have been working very hard for the last 6 years to fully pay off that debt. I still owe about $15,000 of my student loans. And to be fair, it probably would have been a lot less, probably around like the $10,000 mark if I would have paid it when COVID hit, because the loans were deferred for probably about like 3 years, I want to say. And I was really just hoping that the student loan forgiveness initiative would have gone through, but it didn't. Because if it did, I would have had mine completely forgiven. But $15,000 is way better than, $40,000. And then I also am proud to say that I do not have a balance on my credit card right now. Like, I have one singular credit card. I do still use that credit card in order to maintain my credit. But if I know that I can't pay off that balance by the time the next statement hits, I don't charge it. I also was able to get a car that is very reliable. It's newer. It's a 2020. I got it in 2021 with only 4,000 miles on it. It's my dream car. It's a car that I never thought I would be able to obtain or even be qualified for in my whole entire life. I was able to save up $10,000 in a savings account to pay for the down payment on the car. And then I traded in another vehicle that was about like $5,000 in value. So realistically, I did put $15,000 down on the car. I was able to also finance it completely alone. I should actually have that car paid off by next year in 2025. I also was able to build up my credit score to a very high credit score now, to the point where most people don't even have this credit score. Because of that, I was able to finance my car with a loan rate of 1.99%. Keep in mind, this was also in 2021, so I understand that loan rates now are a lot higher. And I will tell you right now that my credit score now is 825. I went from a credit score of 630 to 825 in 6 years. And that is a very significant jump. I just have been overall really humbled, really have gotten myself out of a very tragic situation that I didn't really ever think I would get myself out of. I am just really grateful for my husband's help, even my mom's help, honestly. Like, even though she didn't have much and she had, less than favorable financial habits herself, she was still willing to help me out whenever I needed bailed out. Like whenever I got in my couple different car accidents, she was always there coming in clutch. Even if it put her in debt, like she was still willing to help me out with things financially. Even though those two did really help, I do attribute it highly to just my will and my drive to get myself out of the situation that I was in. Every single time I get paid now from a wedding or even extra streams of income like YouTube, I will put money aside. Like I will physically take money out of that deposit and then put it into savings. And because of that, I've built up a 5-figure savings account, and I have definitely saved up that 6 months worth of income for emergencies. It took so long for me to shift my mindset about this. And it took so long for me to realize how bad of a situation that I was actually in. It took so long. It took me about 5 years to realize this. It's just such a great feeling to be in a situation where I can charge things on a credit card, a debit card, and not have to check my bank account to make sure I can afford it. And even though I am not debt free, I feel like I am financially free because I know I have the savings account as a backup. I know that I can afford the majority of my essentials in life, and I don't have to strap myself in order to afford them. Anyways, I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for the second part of this money talk episode, because I'll be deep diving into my business finances and also what I made in the month of August of 2024 and also September of 2024 as well. Hope you guys are all having a very great day, and I will see you in my next one.